Good afternoon and welcome to The Prescription, the Tax Policy Center's bi-weekly podcast or webcast on fiscal policy for the COVID-19 economy. This is one of a series of conversations that we've had with leading economists and other experts, including state, local, and federal government officials. I'm Mark Mazur. I'm the Robert C. Posen Director of the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center, and I'll be your host today. Howard Gleckman is the usual host. I'm sitting in for Howard. He's on vacation this week, or as we like to say, away on assignment. Our guest today is Michael Strain. He's the Director of Economic Policy Studies and the Arthur F. Burns Scholar in Political Economy at the American Enterprise Institute. Dr. Strain specializes in public finance and labor economics and has written on a wide range of policy issues. He's the author of a new book. It's called The American Dream is Not Dead, but Populism Could Kill It. And he has been characterized as one of the most important conservative voices for reform. Before we begin, let me do a little bit of housekeeping. First, all viewers are muted, but we want to provide a way for you to participate in the event. So please type any questions you may have into the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. Several of you have already submitted questions, so thanks a lot for the head start. And please identify yourself when you submit a question, just like you would do if we were calling you at an in-person event. I encourage you all to join the conversation on social media using the hashtag #LiveAtUrban. Michael Strain, welcome to The Prescription.
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry, my camera wouldn't turn on there.
That's okay. We're all learning how to do this, and it's tough when we're our own tech support.
Yes.
So let's start off by just talking about the current economy. I have never seen anything like this in my lifetime. And just how severe is the public health situation in the current recession?
Well, the recession is incredibly severe. I mean, it's difficult to characterize both the suddenness and the depth of the recession because both the suddenness and the depth were just so dramatic. I mean, if you go back to the middle of March, we were seeing 250,000 or so initial claims for unemployment insurance benefits every week. Kind of roughly the average. Then there was a week ending March 14th where we went up to about 280. Then the next week, we went up to 3.3 million initial claims for unemployment insurance. So a more than 10-fold increase. And to put that 3.3 million in perspective, the previous record was 695,000 new claims that was set in the fall of 1982. Then the week after that, the week ending March 8th, we had nearly 7 million initial claims in 1 week. And so just that tells you how rapidly this crisis hit. Another way to think about it is the unemployment rate. In February, we had an incredibly low unemployment rate of 3.5%. And then in March, the unemployment rate ticked up to 4.4%. In April, the rate hit 14.7%. And if you kind of correct for some anomalies in the calculation of the unemployment rate, it was actually closer to 19.5%. In the Great Recession that began in December of 2007, it took 2 years roughly for the unemployment rate to double from 5% to its peak of 10%. In the pandemic recession, it took 2 months for the unemployment rate to increase fourfold, again using the official unemployment rate. GDP contracted at an annual rate of about 1/3 in the first quarter of 2020. We haven't seen anything like that since the Great Depression. The closest we've come is a 10% quarterly annualized contraction that occurred in 1958. And so this really is just an unprecedented economic slowdown.
And the response from Congress has also been unprecedented, right? The Families First Act was passed, and then the CARES Act was the largest bill that Congress ever enacted in terms of cost, being to over $2 trillion. And you've studied these bills, and right now Congress is looking at another possible package to respond to the situation. They seem to be at loggerheads at the moment with the negotiations. And you studied these acts. What would you put in a package?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is that the CARES Act, I think, was actually, very well designed. I mean, there are a lot of things that I think, Congress didn't get right in the CARES Act, and there are things that I would have done differently. The $600 unemployment benefit supplement provided by the federal government, I think is too much. That's obviously the main point of conflict right now is what to do with that, since that expired at the end of July. But Congress was right to make unemployment benefits more generous. The audacity of the Paycheck Protection Program is really significant. I mean, a program that essentially replaced small business revenue for what was initially an 8-week period, should really tell you something about the bounds of what actually is politically possible. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I think a month earlier people would have said Congress would never be able to do. The amount of money that was appropriated to PPP in the Phase 3 CARES Act, and then in the Phase 3.5 supplement to the CARES Act for those who are really deep in the inside the Beltway. You're getting close to the amount of money that Congress appropriated in the entirety of its response to the Great Recession in the ARA in the Recovery Act, just for PPP alone. A major obstacle to the success of the CARES Act. I mean, I do think it's been successful, but an obstacle, has less been the design of the policies and has more been the Trump administration's implementation of those policies. The stumbles that we've seen with PPP were largely driven by the Treasury Department and not by the actual design of PPP. The $454 billion that was appropriated to the Treasury Department to support Federal Reserve lending programs to larger businesses is kind of just sitting there, and that's not Congress's fault. That's the administration's fault. So, your question was what should we be doing next? And I think I think we should be building off the framework that the CARES Act provided. We should be trying to get things that were in the CARES Act right. So I would encourage, obviously, the Treasury Department to do something with that $454 billion that was appropriated for economic recovery programs, and that could be included in the next law. There could be provisions for how Treasury should use money. So building off the CARES Act, finishing the job that was in the CARES Act, modifying what worked and what didn't. I think Republicans in Congress are right to be attempting to reduce the $600. I don't think the right thing to do is to reduce it to zero. But I think you want to get that payment lower. You want to get that payment on a glide path to zero, because as the recovery continues, as the labor market strengthens, the disincentive to work is going to become more and more important. That's generated by that payment. At the same time, you want to support consumer spending, and I think a lot of the debate about what to do with that $600 is really premised on this false choice, as if the only way to support consumer spending is through the unemployment insurance system. We can both supplement incomes and support consumer spending, which is the good thing that the $600 is doing, a really strong work disincentive, which is the bad thing the $600 is doing, by increasing transfer payments to lower income households that both need more support and have a higher marginal propensity to consume. If we really wanted to, we could increase transfers to middle class households as well, because a lot of the unemployed that are receiving unemployment benefits are not, they're not exclusively lower income by any stretch. We could even turn the problem on its head and give everybody, if you really want to target the aid on the unemployed, which I wouldn't do. I mean, I would target the income support for consumer spending on lower income households. But if you really want to target the unemployed as a group, you could offer them a reemployment bonus. So if you were unemployed, you were getting the $600. If you get a job, then you can get a $2,000 one-time payment or something like that. Then you're continuing to support spending among that specific group of households, while also actually encouraging employment and not discouraging employment. So, doing something with unemployment insurance, doing something with the small business lending program, modifying that so that it works better in an environment where the economy is partially reopened and not completely shut. Doing something with the $454 trillion. I think it's critical that that the federal government give grants to state and local governments. I think that's a necessary component of any recovery legislation. Republicans are right to want to make sure that money isn't used to pension funds that have been mismanaged or things of that nature. So, putting some strings on it, I think makes sense. But relative to February, using the last employment report that we have available, state and local governments have shed 1.5 million jobs. 900,000 of those jobs were education sector workers, at a time when it's critical, in my view, that we get schools reopened. The federal government is putting state and local governments in a position where they are laying off education sector employees. We should be adding education sector employees in order to make schools as safe as possible, with as small classes as possible and as much social distancing as possible. So, that I think is a critical component as well. I think we need to think about what are the kind of medium term needs. And maybe that's too ambitious for what Congress does right now. Maybe the right way to think about the phase 4 package is, let's get from now to February when the next presidential term starts. But I think Congress should not think, okay, we're done after they do whatever they're going to do this month. The economy is going to be extraordinarily weak for several more years, and we're going to need support for labor markets and for workers. We're going to need investment incentives, entrepreneurship incentives, all sorts of things like that to rebuild.
And just to follow up a little bit on the state and local issue, we've seen reports coming out about big declines in state and local revenues. I think one of my colleagues estimated somewhere around 20% or so drop on a year-to-year basis for recent months. And since most state and local governments have some kind of a balanced budget requirement, that basically means if they have less revenue, they do less stuff. And that gets into where you talked about laying off workers. In the Great Recession, I think one of the things that kind of held back the recovery was that the federal government kind of turned off aid to state and local governments too early. And then you saw like a tail of state and local governments reducing support for education, healthcare, other types of things. So I totally get where you're coming from on the state and local aid. Now I've seen the National Governors Association ask for $500 billion or more. Do you have a dollar estimate on like what's needed for a few months?
I don't have a specific dollar estimate. I mean, I think if you look at receipts relative to projections and things of that nature, 20% seems around right. And I think the federal government should be trying to fill a lot of that revenue hole. And the need should really be dictating the size of the package. I mean, this package should be built from the bottom up. So we should be figuring out what does a good small business support program look like, and then figuring out the price tag of that. We should figure out what is the size of the revenue hole we need to plug, and then for state and local governments, and then try to fashion the policy in that way. It shouldn't be top down where we say, okay, we're going to spend $1 trillion. Let's figure out how to divide that $1 trillion up amongst all the goals. And I worry that is the way that Republicans are approaching this. And I think they would be wise to follow more of a bottom-up approach. But the CARES Act did a remarkable job at replacing the incomes that households lost. The CARES Act did a remarkable job at replacing the income that small businesses lost. The CARES Act, I think, was right not to attempt to replace the income that large businesses lost, but did attempt to offer lending programs and things of this nature, which I think is the right thing to do. State and local governments also need income support. They should be thought of more like households and like smaller businesses and less like larger businesses. They need that. They need that revenue. That's in the interest of their workers. We should think of state and local governments as employers of millions of workers, and it's in the interest of their workers, and it's in the interest of the economy overall. To get the unemployment rate down as quickly as possible and to keep it as low as we can. And I think Republicans are right to worry about how the money is going to be spent. And so putting guardrails around it so it doesn't go to mismanaged pension funds, or so that teachers unions don't capture all of it, or things of that nature, I think are absolutely prudent and should happen. But those concerns can be addressed, and those concerns shouldn't stop Congress from giving state and local governments the aid that they need.
Now, let's maybe step back and take a look at the slightly bigger and slightly longer term picture. And one of the things that you mentioned was that you expect the economic downturn to last for a while and take a while to get back to the growth trajectory we were on before. But given the pattern of historically low interest rates that we've seen, does this mean that the federal government should just ignore budget deficits and debt indefinitely going forward, or will there be some time when a reckoning has to occur?
Well, I don't think that the federal government should be ignoring budget deficits and debt under any circumstances. I don't think that the government should be. I think the government should continue to be prudent and careful with taxpayer money. One of the objections I have to the $600 supplement is that it's just an imprudent use of taxpayer money to be raising people's incomes above what they were when they were working, when they exit employment and go on the unemployment insurance rolls. That's just not a prudent or responsible use of tax dollars. Full replacement in a once in a century pandemic shutdown situation, I fully support that. Let's not do more than that. I think that there are very good reasons to be less concerned about the economic impact of debt and deficits than economists had previously thought. There are reasons to be less concerned in the year 2020 than there were in the year 1990, and I think that certainly should factor into the decisions that fiscal policy makes. But that is a far cry from an endorsement of modern monetary theory or an endorsement of the idea that debt and deficits don't matter. I think we can be confident that we should spend what we need to spend to address this economic emergency. I mean, we should be thinking of this situation as something akin to a world war or to the Great Depression. This is the kind of thing that happens very infrequently. We really haven't been in a situation like this that's this severe for a century. We're not likely to see another one for quite some time, and we should be doing everything we can in order to get the economy recovered as quickly as possible, and that's going to involve a lot of deficit spending. And that's just something we should be comfortable with. We should be comfortable with that regardless of whether or not interest rates have been on a 30-year decline, and regardless of whether or not America is kind of in a low inflationary environment. I mean, those concerns should be in the backseat regardless of that. But the fact that we are in this environment that's much more, this macroeconomic environment that's much more conducive to public borrowing, is all the more reason not to worry about it. Having said that, the long run fiscal imbalance that the United States faces is a real issue. And it was an issue before the pandemic. It's going to be an issue after the pandemic. The pandemic really doesn't change the drivers of that long run fiscal imbalance. The pandemic spending is temporary, but the long run fiscal imbalance is driven by gap in projected spending on entitlement programs and projected federal revenue. And the pandemic doesn't really do a whole lot to affect the long-term trends of either of those series. And so, we need to get the debt to GDP ratio on a downward trajectory, and we need to take that. We need to take that seriously. But we can proceed in a deliberate fashion, and we can spread the pain out over a period of time. I think reasonably confident that we're not going to have in the United States a Greek-style debt crisis, or that we're not going to see deeply troubling amount of private investment crowd out or spiking interest rates.
We could spend a lot of time talking about the debt deficit, but I think I want to change topics a little bit to your book that recently came out. So in your book, you argue that populists on both the right and the left have been peddling a message about economic decline, and that the policy prescriptions really could undermine the American dream. The tremendous economic dislocation that was caused by the Great Recession was a driver to that. But in the COVID pandemic-induced recession, that's much deeper. Do you expect to see additional efforts from populists that could lead to a greater populist revolt and maybe even more unproductive policy decisions?
It's certainly possible. I thank you for bringing up the book. It came out in February. Here it is, everybody, and it's available on Amazon. So buy copies for your friends and neighbors. It's quite short. You can knock it out pretty quickly. I think it's the right length for a book. I think that the evidence that I marshal in the book applies to this current situation in several important ways. One way is that it should give people hope and confidence that American workers and households will be able to overcome this challenge. What I do in the book is I look at the past 3 decades. I look at things like wage growth, income growth, economic mobility, what's happening in the middle of the labor market in terms of the occupation wage distribution. And I conclude that over the last 3 decades or so, American workers and households have seen economic progress and have experienced economic success. That hasn't been uninterrupted. That was interrupted by the Great Recession. It was interrupted by previous recessions. But even given those recessions, if you look at the last 30 years on the whole, it's a story of progress. It's a story of success. And so that should give people confidence that, yes, this is an extremely difficult situation. Yes, it's a hardship on millions. And yes, we're going to be in a bad place for quite some time. But if the past is any predictor, workers and households will put this episode in the rearview mirror and will continue their upward march of economic progress. One of the things that could be an obstacle is what you say, which is the policy response to this. And I am worried, not in the short run. I mean, I think Congress has done a very good job, did a great job in March. And I continue to expect as a baseline, my baseline case, that Congress will do a good job in August, although, every, at this point of the calendar, every hour that isn't true, I think lowers the probability. But that continues to be my base case. But I do worry about, what happens a year from now or so when workers and households in the bottom half of the income distribution, that we're just finally seeing the benefits of economic growth in 2017, 2018, 2019, go through another year or 2-year or 3-year period where they really are in pretty bad shape. What that does to populism on the left and the right. What does that do to the successors to President Trump? on the political right, what does that do to the kind of Bernie Sanders wing of the political left? I mean, I think there's reason to believe it will empower both of those groups, and I think that's that'll be bad for the country, and if they succeed in pushing economic policy in the direction they want, it'll be bad for the economy as well.
And so one of the things I think that has spurred some of the increased emphasis on populism has been increased inequality, kind of across the board, where folks look and they say that even though my life may be getting a little better, it's not as good as I'd hoped, and nor is it as good as lots of other people that I can see. And in addition, there's consistent racial dimensions of inequality in terms of jobs, incomes, wealth, home ownership, and a whole range of things. You've been characterized as a voice of conservative reform. So, what are the reform policies that you'd suggest to address some of these longstanding inequalities?
So I kind of take a different view on inequality. I think I think what is driving frustration and certainly what drove frustration in the aftermath of the Great Recession was less about inequality per se and more just about what was happening in people's careers and in their economic prospects. Separate and apart from the gap between them and people at the top. If you look at the 1990s, for example, you see inequality growing rapidly. But people weren't concerned about inequality in the 90s because average wages were also growing rapidly, and wages throughout the distribution were growing at a good clip as well. If you look at income inequality since 2007, when explosion about inequality, when interest in inequality exploded, you actually see stagnant inequality growth, at least as measured by the Gini coefficient, and that's in stark contrast to what happened in the 90s. Why was there such concern about inequality post 2007? I think just because typical workers and workers in the bottom half of the income distribution were not seeing benefits of the recovery yet. But I think regardless of the role of inequality per se, I think that it's imperative that economic opportunity be pushed to every worker in every household. And I think the absolute outcomes, not the relative outcomes, but the absolute outcomes of people in the working class and in lower income households need to improve. And that is going to require public policy to advance earning subsidies, to advance opportunities to build skills. It's going to require, some deregulation, barriers like occupational licensing and things of that nature. A whole kind of suite of policies. That was true before the pandemic. It's going to be even more true after.
So getting close to wrapping up, but I noticed in your biography that you worked at the Census Bureau early in your career, and
I did.
I wanted to see if you have any thoughts about the way the 2020 census is being conducted, in particular, whether this is likely to be the least accurate census in recent history.
Yeah, I worked for the Census Bureau while I was in graduate school, so I have good memories of that. I'm concerned about the 2020 census. It's a really difficult time, obviously, and I think the census needs more resources to make this as successful as possible. And I think this is a situation where we need to be listening to the experts. And so the statisticians and economists at the Census Bureau should be making recommendations about what is needed, and Congress and the administration should just give it to them. This is an extremely important function. It determines the shape of the House of Representatives. It determines the flow of hundreds of billions of dollars of federal money to state and local governments. It is the backbone of the federal statistical system in many ways. It's a constitutional obligation of the government. There really aren't that many constitutional obligations. This is one of them, and so this is a situation where we shouldn't be penny wise and pound foolish.
Okay, I think we'll wrap up there on that conclusion of we should listen to experts. And good to have one of the experts from the conservative movement, Michael Strain, here with us. So thank you very much, and thank you to all the participants. This concludes our presentation. It will be available on our website if you want to catch a replay. Thanks again, and see you in 2 weeks. Bye now.